Porters who changed the world. But in the meantime, let's get on with the show. We have Ann Walsh and Mary Ann Howard coming up in a little bit. So stay where you're sitting. Do not touch your dials. Tinfoil hats on your head. And get your Beatles albums out.
Hospital Porter's pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to HPANWO Radio.
Well, I'm pleased to say that one of the guests this evening is actually in the chat box right now, so if you do join the chat box, you can talk to her directly. I have, of course, the return of Ann Walsh and her co-author, Mary Ann Howard, who's the one in the chat right now. They've written a new book about the life and death of Paul McCartney. That's tricky. Collaborating as an author is always a difficult thing, but they've done a really good job. It's called Shadow of a Bassman. It's a fictionalization, and I've read it, and it's pretty good. I enjoyed it very, very much. Anne was previously on the program in program 377, but Mary Ann is new, and it's great to welcome her to the HPANWO show. Today, of course, is George Harrison's birthday, which is very appropriate. If I hadn't skipped last week's show, I'd have probably done this one last week. So, yeah, it was a good reason for things, isn't they? So, with no further ado, let me bring onto the show Ann Walsh and Mary Ann Howard. So, ladies and gentlemen, listeners to the HPANWO show on HPANWO Radio, we have two ladies on the show tonight. One of them you'll know and the other one you won't. Probably you might have heard of her, but Ann Walsh has been on many times now. And we also have Mary Ann Howard. How are you, ladies? Are you well?
Doing great.
Yes, doing very well. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for having us on your show. Really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for listening in.
Oh, that's absolutely. It's great that you're both here. And Mary Ann, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on HPANWO Radio.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, the reason you'll probably guess the reason I brought these ladies onto the show, because Ann, of course, is a specialist on a particular subject, and she's written a book along with Mary Ann, and it is The Shadow of a Bassman. So let's talk about this book. It's quite unusual, actually, because there's other Paul is Dead books. I mean, we've spoken before with Nick Colostrum and other people, and they've written books about this. But this, you may be surprised to find, you may think it's just a story, and it reads like a story, but what is it exactly? What gave you the idea for this book?
Well, it's based on, about 9 years of research. And the easiest way to tell what happened, I think, is in a fictional way. And the book reads in like 3 different levels. So if you're just interested in a murder mystery and know nothing about the Beatles, it just reads like a fictional novel. If you're a Beatle fan and you know about the rumor, you don't believe it, it makes, a good read as a mystery into the rumor of Paul's death. And then if you are a researcher, it has some hidden gems in there for people to look at and to discern for themselves. It's just a fictional account of what we think happened, but it's based on a lot of research, and it's based on the rumor and a lot of facts about what was behind Beatlemania and what Paul was into prior to his death. And
yeah, I think Anne's breaking up slightly. Can you hear me all right, Anne?
I can hear you just fine.
Oh, brilliant. That's great. Yeah, I mean, you actually hear from Paul in his own words in this book. I mean, it's told from a multi-side perspective of different people involved in the whole story, including the other members of the band. But Mary Ann, listeners are familiar with Anne, and because we've been talking about this book and looking forward to it for a very long time, I always say whenever I get Anne on, I say, "When's the book coming out, Anne? When's it coming out?" But Mary, you're new to this particular station, so tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with this project.
Well, I've always been a Beatle fan. Always loved Paul since I was little, and it's fitting that we're recording this show anyway on the day that they were on the Ed Sullivan Show. I mean, that's, I think, where everybody came to knowing who the Beatles were. And, I found out about Paul's death several years ago. Struck me. It was like really hard at first because, of course, I was devastated. But then the more I researched it and the more, I just went along with it at that time, and continued on. And last year I got to meet Anne and we hit it off right away. We were talking all the time. And within a matter of like 6 weeks, we decided let's pull ourselves together and do a book. Yeah. And this wasn't the original book that Anne was working on that she's talked to you before. We're doing that one next. But yeah, this one just sort of developed, and it developed rather quickly for us.
Yes, it's a really amazing thing, because of course sometimes fiction can be a good way of telling the truth. I made that point because I've given you a review on Amazon, and I made that point in the review that because of course my own fiction is that kind of allegorical type fiction. Sometimes you tell a story about a real thing, you can communicate information you may not be able to if you just write a book about almost anything. It's about just as a non-fictional book. I sometimes think if George Orwell had just written a book about the fear of upcoming totalitarian government, he'd be labelled a conspiracy theorist. But instead, he produced a magnificent piece of English literature in 1984, which it communicates the points he wants to make so much better than if he'd just written something factual. And I think this is a lesson for us all here. And because whatever happened, I mean, this is a plausible idea, because I did wonder when I first heard about this. I rejected the idea when I first heard about Paul being dead. I thought, no, it came. I suppose the weight of evidence convinced me in the end. And this book contains a scenario, even though it's not actually factual. It contains a scenario which means that some people could bypass that. Because the first thing I thought was, well, that's not possible. It couldn't be done. This book explains how hypothetically it could be done. Mm-hmm. There's, how much of this is new? I mean, for example, there's several individuals in here. I mean, there's Inspector Ryan Wilson. Now he, I don't want to put any spoilers in here, but he sort of like plays a double role. He goes from one end to the other. He starts off as the investigator and then
the friend.
He becomes a friend. Yeah. Is he a real person?
Yes, he is actually. He's Marianne's son-in-law.
Oh, right.
the name, yes, the name was my son-in-law, who was also a composer and a musician, had a band in Philadelphia. So, yeah, there's memorials in there for me. We're using Ryan and my daughter. So, yeah.
There's also Brian Epstein's mentioned in there a couple of times, and obviously, like he's obviously playing quite a sinister role in all this. How accurate is that, do you think? Does he have questions to answer?
Well, I think he was the closest one to the Beatles. He was probably their handler. He had the best access to them. What we really know about Brian Epstein is that he was part of the Jimmy Savile pedophile ring, and that's been, all over the place. So you just kind of take it from there. If he was involved in that ring and what was going on, and he was involved in really depleting the Beatles empire, taking a lot of money from them, the corruption with that. You just kind of just take it from there. Yeah. And, I don't know if he really did all the things that he did, but we had to have a villain. And Brian, I think, is one of them.
Sorry, Mary Ann, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking of fiction. What is that phrase with fact and fiction and truth? There's always truth hidden within.
Allegory.
And I think there's a lot of truth hidden within Brian's storyline.
Yeah, obviously he would. It's obvious. I realised when I started looking into this that he, of course, would have to be involved. He would have to be, as their manager. He would have been the person who got. You call him Mackenzie in this particular story. Bill Williams, Sir William, whatever his name is, Fall. He would have had to select him and get him into the band and get the whole thing would have to be organised by him. But he's the fact that you see, because of course it's not an accident in this story, and you explore a little bit about why Paul was taken out, because Paul sort of speaks in his own words here. So did you speak to Shirley? I know Shirley Bostock writes the foreword, but did she provide any information for this?
Everything in the book is based on research. So whatever I can't verify, I don't write about it. So the facts in the story are true, but it's really our idea of what happened to Paul and a theory of what happened to him as far as meeting Brian and getting into the accident. And I do believe, since the Crays were around the Beatles, especially around Brian, that they would be the ones that were contracted to do it. So yeah, Shirley and I and Marianne, I mean, we're all friends. But the book stands on this research.
Yeah.
And the scenario, what could have happened.
We actually didn't talk to Shirley a whole lot during the time we were writing, because we were so busy talking to each other and just writing. We had this book done in like 2 months, actually, the story complete. And Anne and I processed it chapter by chapter. So it's not like it's the first book I've ever written. So, and Anne's, in the same sense of writing a novel like this, I don't know how other authors do it. Do they do an outline? Do they have character development? Do they know where they're going with it? We had no idea. We had no idea in chapter 1 where this was going to end up.
I don't see, like writing, people do it different ways. I mean, I, like yourself, I think I tend to get an idea. I start a book, I don't necessarily know where it's going to end up. It
took a life of its own.
Yeah, I just start the book. If I have an idea how to start it, I start it, and then this is how I wrote my last 3 books, and then I just let the process go, and I let myself free, and I try to channel my muse, as they say, to try and get.
We did a lot of discussions on the next chapter before we started that chapter, and then it just went back and forth from there. We say we wrote a lot, like John and Paul. One would come in with an idea and knowing where we were going to go with it, and then just proceed from there and just send it back and forth. So
So it's like you didn't assign yourself different bits, because in the book, stylistically, the book is pretty much consistent throughout. I couldn't say, Anne wrote that bit and Marianne wrote that bit, or anything like that.
And if you saw our back and forth, you could understand why. It's color coded and all over. First editions, first back and forth, second ones back and forth. So we constantly mixed it up, wrote, switched.
Yeah. It would be, I suppose, for someone new to this, I mean, it would educate them. It's kind of like a crash course in getting them to think outside the box. But I do look at this and I wonder, if for someone new to this, it's obvious, like Paul McCartney, of course, was one of the most popular men in the world, and everyone was fond of him. It seems astonished that he would make enemies and people, because there's several different motives for getting rid of him, really, in the story. It's like he seems to rub a lot of people up the wrong way. And so for someone new to this, how could you introduce this kind of element to Paul McCartney?
It's the New World Order. They had a set agenda for the whole British invasion, and he didn't want to go along with it. He was into, the anti-war. We know the Beatles were anti-war, and they were Paul's against drugs. That's been documented. That according to Dick Lester, the producer of Help, he said that Paul refused heroin on the set of Help, so he didn't want any part of any drugs, anything that was going to interfere with his mind and his creativity. He didn't want any part of. And of course, over here, he was very, very vocal about his civil rights. So he's into a lot of good things that goes against authority, against establishment.
Yeah, that's true. And we do live in a world where there's increasing levels of authoritarianism, that's without a doubt. And
the 60s were a little volatile in that regard. So you had the civil rights movements and, the marching and segregation. And it was, look at what happened when they came on their one tour with the Beatle burning because of John and his statement on Jesus and the church. So, yeah, it was, they were a controversial band that rubbed the establishment the wrong way.
Yeah, and ironically, all John was doing actually was quoting a fact, because there was a survey done where they asked 100 people, have you heard of the Beatles, and they asked them, have you heard of Jesus, and apparently 99 of them had heard of the Beatles, but only 97 had heard of Jesus. So that's all John always. When John says we're more popular than Jesus, he was just stating a fact.
Yeah,
more famous than Jesus, because they are. Yeah, I mean
that's not the Beatles' fault. It wasn't John's fault. That's just a sign of the times. And yeah,
I mean, the 60s it was before my time, but my parents told me about it. It was such a it was a pretty turbulent decade, and people often wondered whether we'd ever. They said, well, we might get to 1970, but we'll all be dead by 1980, and they said things like that. And I suppose the element you bring in about the Tavistock Institute, the mind control thing, is very interesting to me, because I've heard other people talk about this, and the use of LSD. Now, there's several different stories about LSD, about what it means. Of course, it was originally used as a mind-altering drug. It was used on prisoners of war, for example, in the Korean War. So. The whole thing with LSD, how do the Beatles tie into that? Because I know people said the Beatles were taking LSD when they made Yellow Submarine, and if you watch it, I mean, I think, yeah, maybe they were, because it's a very psychedelic thing. But what was their position on LSD? You mentioned heroin, but Paul wouldn't take that. But would they take acid?
Well,
before or after? That's the line, I think. Anyway, I mean, Paul was against it before 66 or 67, and the switch changed. And I think the other ones becoming despondent, losing their mate. What other escape is there? They had to still show up and deal with it, and that mind-altering drugs is a way of doing that. I mean, granted, they were doing LSD, a couple of them beforehand, I think the year or so before.
But it started against their will, too.
Correct.
Dr. John Riley, their dentist, laced John and George's tea with LSD without their knowledge or consent. And so that's the first documented incident of them taking LSD.
That's been done before.
People often wonder, why didn't Paul get his tooth fixed? He left that chipped tooth for a very long time. He didn't want to go to a dentist.
He didn't trust a dentist.
Your mate's drug, with drugs. What do you want to go to a dentist for?
Yeah, I suppose
that's. Why do you go not to like physicians and don't trust physicians anymore? Well, because physicians were the ones lacing, one of the ones lacing their drinks with LSD, and that was the dentist.
Dr. I mean, the CIA used to do this a lot. I mean, they used to get. If they wanted someone to interrogate somebody, they'd get like a prostitute to put LSD in their tea or something, and right. Then the prostitute would be trained to interrogate them, and they'd film it, things like that. And Paul, like I said, in the leading up to his final death, I mean, the other guys notice he's acting strangely, and he has he writes this little letter. Can't remember which page it was on, sorry, but the element of mind control, they were using. See, the Tavistock Institute were using the music industry to control people's mind. They were still doing it. They're still doing it today, but they were doing it even more back then.
Right.
Did you know Jimmy Savile? You mentioned, because Brian Epstein, friends with Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile was abusing children from back then in the BBC. He worked for the BBC for 46 years, and he was doing this from day one.
Right.
There's never, and of course, there's obviously a conspiracy behind it.
Conspiracy, what is that? Truth.
Exactly. Put theory behind it, and then that's...
Let's discredit the people who tell the truth because it's conspiracy. No one's supposed to know these things.
Yeah, I see it in the media today when they're discussing other subjects. They say, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory." Therefore, it can be ignored.
It all came out after Kennedy's assassination. Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Well, anything to shut it down. So it's just been a continuation.
The term conspiracy theory actually doesn't predate the Warren Commission. It came out when they were reporting on the Warren Commission because people were too suspicious of what happened. They said Oswald didn't act alone, things like that. Oh, they say it's a conspiracy theory.
Correct.
And they just call it that, and they can then say it's all nothing. They can always go crazy. There's several other people. Who's Mal? M-A-L. Who's this?
Mal Evans.
Because this is all to do with. This is really strange because William Mackenzie is the name of the imposter. Is that his real name? Because I've heard several names for who the band we call Paul McCartney is.
We don't know.
How much do we know about him?
I don't know much about him, and nor do I care to. To be honest, we know that his name is Bill.
Tell us how you really feel, Ian.
I can guess.
We know his name is Bill, but what's his last name? Anybody can guess.
Yeah.
So we just pick Mackenzie because
we turned that around for a little bit, didn't we? Going back and forth on what we were going to use as his name.
Yeah, we did. And so Bill Mackenzie actually represents the imposter Bill, but he also represents the MI5, MI6, the British intelligence also. Because it was very hard to write everything that was going on with Paul without having a witness. And we didn't want to introduce another character because that kind of gets confusing. So we just used Bill Mackenzie being there since the beginning of the formation of the Beatles. And I think they were followed in the Liverpool area when they were in their formative years, as all the bands were, to figure out what bands are going to really make it and for their, cultural change.
Yeah, the biggest... Sorry, Marianne, go ahead.
No, we don't know, but what we're alleging is that he was watched, and he obviously, to come in and replace someone, you're going to have to get to know them, know their mannerisms and the way they speak and what they speak about and how their inflections, so that was a Paul thing too. He always added the you-knows in there a lot. So the thing that Billy didn't carry over was Paul's anxieties. He did not, it's like that switch happened as well, as far as how he spoke and his mannerisms around that. But the Mackenzie too, if he coming from Scottish roots was a Scottish name, and Father Mackenzie was in there too. I mean, Eleanor Rigby.
Of course,
so
yes.
That's just sort of fit for us.
Yeah, it's a perfect link because, of course, Father Mackenzie in the song is who buries the Eleanor Rigby.
Who buries the Eleanor Rigby, who was Eleanor Rigby. I think Paul was writing about himself.
Yeah, it's a remarkable actually. People who are really, really keen on the Beatles spotted this first, but there's so many clues in the songs, in the album covers, things like that. There's just so much that they want to.
There's so many clues in the albums and the album covers, and continues on to this day. I think in the latest release, there's even more clues.
Yeah, there's I think there's I think this sooner or later this is going to come out. It will all come out. The truth will come out, and it's What's also interesting is now this is something that is also real, and Anne and I have discussed it before on the show. We've even talked to the gentleman involved. Is Paul's son, because of course technically he didn't have any children until he met Heather, but
Oh, yeah.
but he actually had a son much earlier with this woman you call her Megan. I don't know if that's
Yeah, we used my daughter's name.
oh,
Megan.
that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course that's I haven't heard from him lately. But of course I did do an interview with a gentleman who says he's Paul McCartney's son. Have you? I don't know what he's doing now. I haven't heard from him for a while. I hope he's okay.
He's keeping busy in
He's
lockdown.
okay.
He's still in Liverpool.
Oh, good. I'm glad he's okay. That's I think it's going to come out sooner or later. It's going to come out sooner or later because Bill.
Everything's going to come out sooner or later. I think as a lot of things that have been held against. I follow you, Ben, and some of your other topics. So this is a big one for us. In the scheme of things, we think this was like one of the first major. I mean, obviously, Paul, major person, filmed all over the world, interviewed, photographed. It's the illusion, and that'll be a big thing for many people when it does come out.
Yeah, and it's putting together a story like this makes it plausible because, of course, one of the biggest stumbling blocks, the things that I hear all the time, is it's not possible in just 2 months they could. Well, after he died, within just 2 months they could get another guy in there who looks like him, musical like him, things like that. And of course they can. And in the book you explain how that's done, and like a hypothetical scenario how that could be done. And I mean, of course, as you explained, they're very, very resourceful, and even from the earliest days they would have been thinking in terms like this about, because of course the Fab Four, I mean, they were so successful, they were part of Britain's gross domestic product.
Yeah.
You're gonna buy out, if you're gonna have something like that, you're gonna buy insurance, aren't you? You're going to take out insurance on your investment.
In your assets.
Yes, which means they've got to think, well, what if we do lose one of these guys? Can they carry on? Can they carry on with just three, or can they have another one? Of course, no. We've got to keep it as it is. It's just perfect the way it is. But,
what would happen if the Beatles weren't there? You guys were not there. I was little, so the economy would have. From what I'm gathering, the Beatles were the British economy in the 60s, along with the other bands, largest product.
Yeah, I mean, if you consider that the albums were they hit I think there was a world record. They hit the #1 spot even before they'd been released. So people were pre-ordering them to the point where the pre-orders were overtaking the sales of any other record. I mean, that's remarkable. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's absolutely incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's kind of a spiritual sense in this book as well. I mean, I don't know if not all readers will go along with that, but I mean, I do take the spiritual side of things seriously. Even the cat, even the little.
Yes.
What's the name of the cat?
Disney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the cat seems to be in touch with Paul.
Animals usually are.
They're very, very intuitive, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
They really, really are.
Well, Paul loved animals. We know that. And John had a love for cats. So we just kind of had Thisbe as one of the main characters in the book, too, taking John around all the time.
Cats, that's why cats are associated with witches, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's how that came about. Just, they loved animals, so we just had Thisbe. And Paul did have a cat named Thisbe at that time. So.
Oh, yeah. That's just, it's lovely. It's a lovely part of the story as well. It really, really is. Yeah. But I think maybe you really get behind John Lennon in this, because John is like one of the main protagonists of the story. And you really do, I think, get a sense of who he is. You really do see the world through his eyes in a way that I've not heard before. I don't know if he's ever been a fictional character in any other story, but I don't think I've ever heard him as a main protagonist.
Yeah. There's actually, if you go on the internet, there's Beatle fan pics they're little short stories about the Beatles. Mostly they're about, girl falls in love with Beatle. The world is great.
Huh.
So I was reading some of these prior to writing the Shadow of the Bassman, and I was quite disappointed in a lot of the stories. I didn't think it depicted them in a very good light, and didn't really capture their characters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we tried to do with John, Paul, George, and Ringo, is really try to capture their characters and how unique they were. And that's a lot of research, reviewing interviews with them, catching their language and their point of views on issues too. So we try to bring that into the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that John and Paul were best of friends. And I think he took it very hard. It kind of showed after 1967, his decline mentally. He went into a depression, and he was taking a lot of drugs at that time too, into the Sgt. Pepper sessions. And,
Yeah. I mean, generally, you could sense the huge difference. I mean, I don't think I'm not as close to the whole subject as you are in terms of the band. I mean, I do enjoy their music, but I'm not a major fan in the way you are. But you can see the difference in their demeanor and in their image and their style, their musical style. After 66, it gets darker. It gets more convoluted. Definitely.
Yeah. And Billy takes over the band, which it was John's band.
Mm.
And that was just his decline, his depression. And
that would have not had anything to do with Brian's death. That
Okay, ladies and gents, I hope you're enjoying yourself and enjoying going through this very, very fascinating subject with Mary Ann and Anne. And Mary Ann is still in chat if you want to talk about it in there. There's lots of interesting discussions going on at the moment. And so we're going to take a little break now. You can go and get another glass of wine if you're Metatron, who has turned up, and Lisa, or another cup of tea or anything else you'd like to do. And we'll be back in a few minutes after this.
When I'm down, I can't swim.
And that there was The Hindu Times by Oasis. And you may notice I haven't played any Beatles tunes tonight, and I'm not going to. But that, I think, was a very interesting song, because the Oasis are very Beatles influenced. And you can actually hear it quite well in that particular tune. So it's one of their most Beatles-like tracks. I think it's one of their best ones as well. I'm having a bit of trouble with chat. I don't know if anyone else is, but I'm finding my comments are not showing up. I did a test post and it seemed to work, but I had a big long comment I posted before and it didn't appear. So if anyone else is having any problems, just let me know and I'll look into it. But it could be that chat box is having a bit of a funny moment. But anyway, you don't need a chat box to listen. I'll return you straight away to the interview with Anne and Mary Ann. So here we go.
The characters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we tried to do with John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Was really, try to capture their characters and how unique they were. And that's a lot of research, reviewing interviews with them, pitching their language, and their point of views on issues too. So we try to bring that into the book as well. Mm-hmm. And we know that John and Paul were best of friends. And I think he took it very hard. It kind of showed after 1967, his decline mentally. He went into a depression and he was taking a lot of drugs at that time too, into the Sgt. Pepper sessions. And,
yeah. I mean, generally, you could sense the huge difference. I mean, I don't think I'm not as close to the whole subject as you are in terms of the band. I mean, I do enjoy their music, but I'm not a major fan in the way you are. But you can see the difference in their demeanor and in their image and their style, their musical style. After 66, it gets darker. It gets more convoluted. Definitely.
Yeah. And Billy takes over the band, which, it was John's band. And that was just his decline, his depression. And
that would have not had anything to do with Brian's death. That was more deeply rooted than just Brian dying.
Yeah. What do you think?
It started in September of 66. That's when John started talking about it.
Yeah. There's I mean, in a sense, how did Bill, or whatever his name is, I mean, how did he fit in with the others? I mean, how difficult was it for him to deal with the people who knew who he really was, who knew that he wasn't Paul? How did he cope with that? How did they cope with him?
I think there was times when they got into fights. There's documentation that it appears by the time Sgt. Pepper was coming along, the infighting started a lot more. So they got along with them because they had to get along with them. But there was a lot of fighting and a lot of control, Bill wanting control of the music and his vision of what the Beatles should be, and take them into a new direction, which was far different from Paul.
Yeah, I mean the costumes and things like that changed, didn't they? I mean, they seem to be.
Oh yeah.
They got the previous. I mean, they started off by wearing leathers, and they wore like the suits, and then suddenly they're wearing weird pastel-colored.
That was also a mid to late 60s thing generally, the mod thing. But I think that also had to do with Paul not being there. We would have called Paul a metrosexual, I think is probably the term that people use for people that are like very well put together, businessmen, whatever. Not Billy.
Yeah.
Not Billy. Paul was regimented in what he wore, in his demeanor of clothing and whatnot.
Yeah,
they wouldn't have had to tell Paul. What was it that we just were looking at this week about getting a bath or something? There's some stuff on the Get Back videos that'll be interesting to see how they're cutting and working those videos. That's going to be released on the Let It Be sessions and such. I just saw where George was very disgruntled and not wanting to do something and called Billy Paul, Pollyanna, or not Pollyanna, Paulina. And I was like, what the heck? I said that's what he wanted to say was Pollyanna, but I called him Paulina. Paulina, I'll do whatever you want me to do.
That's strange, isn't it? It's like he's trying to say it without
he
to make it too obvious.
Says things, and he gives looks and does things that he gives everybody the hints without having to do it, because obviously they're all under non-disclosures. Britain's policies for, I'm sure everybody that knew and was around at that time has signed agreements.
Yeah. They've probably been threatened as well. I mean,
well, look how many people have died.
Yeah, exactly.
We started in that in the book, from going from Tara Brown to Brian, to their attorney, Dr. Asher.
They would,
John eventually.
They would definitely take people's lives to keep secret, without a doubt. I mean, that's completely. They've done that before, and it doesn't surprise me at all. They do that. George, interestingly, do you remember? It was actually not long before he died. He had a break-in at his house. Do you remember that?
Yep. Yes.
Which
and
is odd.
We think that was a mind control operation as well, just the same as like Mark David Chapman. They both don't recollect much of anything other than they were there, and they know that that's what happened.
Yeah, it's very strange because I mean, he's very keen on security. He was, George. His house was like very well protected, and he didn't go out. He used to go down to the local pub because he lived in the countryside, and he used to go have a drink there and go back. But this guy stabbed him.
How did he get past the security? How did he get into the house?
Yeah.
He actually got into the house. So there's there's more there.
Were they planning? Was George going to say something? Do you think? Was he threatening, or was he saying things he shouldn't have said? Because he did make this strange Pollyanna comment a long time earlier.
Oh, George left little things like that slip a lot of times. He called him. Look at Ring. There was the one video where George, when he was sick, calls him Billy as he's coming in. Hello, Billy, as he's coming into a room, and Ringo was filming it, and Billy didn't notice at first, and he wanted him to turn off the video, and Ringo says, "No, I don't want to."
Funny enough, someone else did that with Bill, actually.
There's several of those incidences on film on tape of them calling him Billy.
There's a weird. This happened quite recently, actually. Who was it who said "Hi, Bill" or something like that on a? And we talked about this, I think, on the last show. Who was that lady who said?
Olivia did it.
Yeah, Olivia.
Yes, that's it. She said, "Hi, Bill," and just as she was moving away from the camera, and it's like she just let it slip out, like she knows who he is, and she addresses him by his real name.
And and that was one of those things where I always thought that the Heather divorce incident and Protect Me comments were relating to that, but now I'm sitting there and I'm not sure how much. I mean, obviously that would come into play, but what exactly still was going on there, because she was standing next to him when Olivia called him Bill or Billy.
Yeah.
So it's not like she wasn't aware as well. I mean, everybody was aware except for us, the people.
I've often wondered about Heather, about how much she knew, because of course she only met Paul in 2002, but Linda, of course, would have had to know.
Linda just going into it. I think
first wife,
pretty accurate in the book, is she would have known.
Yeah.
She would have heard the bands talking. She was photographing a lot of bands at that time.
Yeah. So she would have had, obviously she would have had to know. And she knew Paul, of course, the real Paul. I think she knew the real Paul.
Yeah, we think that she took photographs of him during the 66 tour. But she knew in the spring of 67, with her connections with Jay Marks, who was an author and artist in New York City. And she was, Linda was going around, taking pictures of the British bands that were coming over. And talking to them, found out about the rumor and told Jay Marks. And Jay Marks told Roby Young, who was a disc jockey, and actually broke the rumor 2 years later when it came to the United States and became public. So we, the rumor, we wanted to make sure that in The Shadow of the Baseman that we lined out how the rumor got started, where it came from, how it got to the United States, how it took two and a half years for it to go public here and then nationwide. So that's all, time lined out in the book when we introduced the students from Michigan, the University of Michigan. They're fictional characters, of course, but it was the only way to tell the story.
Give them some insight, Anne, into those characters. The three lads.
Mm.
Mark, Luke, and Sam.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Matt, he's kind of like the Paul in the group.
They
have their roles. They do have their roles.
Mm.
Yeah,
there
did.
There was a kind of rapport with them. I thought was similar to the band in a way.
Yeah, it's a reflection of how John, Paul, and George were back in their formative years. They were extremely close. Extremely close. They did everything together. They even played pubs as the trio. So there was just the three of them for a while. So they were always together, always practicing, always playing. Became very tight. And then, of course, Ringo came along a few years later and joined them and was just as close to them. So with the three Michigan students, we kind of wanted to reflect that friendship and how these three, grew up together in Michigan and went to school together, and now we're in college together. And Sam is a John, like a John character, very outspoken, and Luke is the more philosophical one, spiritual one, like George would be. So yeah, that's how those three characters, just kind of a reflection of John, Paul, and George.
Yeah, so. that was a nice bit. That there's a lot of it. The book is touching. The story is like an emotional story, very much so. Not just about Paul, obviously, but about the other Beatles and
right, because they had to use it,
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
There's also some things the readers would find disturbing. I think is the black magic element. Did you when you decided to put that in because the Satanists and things like that?
Yeah, we decided to do that because it is part of the story. Billy's side, I think that him being a high-ranking Mason and probably maybe Luciferian, very high up there, the New World Order belief system. So we wanted to introduce that in a light way, not go too dark. We didn't want to go too dark with it, but just kind of touch on those elements in the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. I don't think it's. I was faced with something similar when I was writing my stories about the Satanism. I introduced this, and of course, you can't describe everything because it's just too horrible. It would turn the book into like a splatterpunk novel, basically, if you were too explicit.
Right.
That's right. The thing that came about with this, and it just sort of there again, it evolved as we were writing. But at the time we're writing this, we're hearing about all the sex trafficked, child abuse, and what's going on with the kids. And it just seemed to fit with the storyline, Jimmy Savile, The Crown, and it just all just sort of interwove into the story. Yeah, but we didn't get it as, we wouldn't want to go to the dark side of that. No.
But it's interesting, actually, that you came up with this idea for the book. I mean, it's like life imitating art, because in the real world, you just mentioned it, that there's things coming out in the real world which appear to be like the kind of things that conspiracy theorists, so-called like us, were saying years ago, and it's all coming out now in real life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's because truth is not a conspiracy.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you can't keep the truth down for long. You can't keep it down forever. It seems to be an irresistible force that can only be suppressed for a short amount of time, for a limited amount of time, and it's as in the cases you describe in the book about how this rumor came out. But of course, it's more than a rumor now, and there's so much more going on in the world which is similar. And I mean, it's like we've seen in the last few years, actually, in a sense, things that were used to be secret are now being done in the open, such as electoral fraud, for example. That was done. That's always gone on, but now.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing now, is that it's been always going on.
Yeah, I mean,
here in the States, we're hearing. I'm not sure, and now the other countries that seem to be having this happen as well.
Yeah,
Burma just recently.
It's really quite astonishing.
Yeah.
If it happens openly and these things just are done in the open, they can't survive because they depend on secrecy. And that's a good sign, I think. And at the same time, you're getting like more and more people, I think, looking at things, looking at Billy. I mean, he's not done a lot publicly, has he, Billy? He's been quite secluded. I mean, the last time I saw him perform publicly, I think it was actually the 2012 Olympics. Has he done any concerts since then?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I don't know. I don't have specific dates. I don't know, but I know I'm close to Hershey. I think he was here like 3 or 4 years ago, if I remember.
Oh, he's still getting around.
He's still been performing. We sort of wonder, is he made? How much does he have to continue to be out there in the presence? How much does he want to continue himself? How much does he have to?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that after all these years, more than 50 years now.
54.
54 years, he can actually believe it himself. He's almost like, he may have convinced himself. I mean, people can convince themselves of falsehoods.
Is that like a Stockholm syndrome for the person he's not been captured, he wasn't held hostage, but he's held himself hostage.
Yeah, he was told, obviously, you're going to have to become this person. You would literally have to be this person. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that. I mean, I would never do that. I couldn't do that. I couldn't be who I'm not. But he may have been, obviously, because he was obviously trained for this. Yeah, he was an existing intelligence asset at the time, and they've said at one point you might have to become this person. Just in case, prepare for and rehearse and. Keep pressing that guitar and things like that, just in case, And of course,
yeah, and it's noted that we think he's probably ambidextrous because he might have been more right-handed than left-handed. Different ways he picks up the guitar and does things more with the right side than the left. Paul was a true lefty.
Yeah, he was totally left-handed, but Billy. I mean, I've heard this before, that Billy has been seen at sometimes using his right hand as a major hand.
Yeah.
So, you see, I've heard that you can actually, you can train yourself to use the other hand if you, I mean, I've never tried this myself, but you can train yourself to, not to become the other-handed, but you can train yourself to be ambidextrous.
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is, but you can't train yourself to be left-handed if you're right-handed or vice versa.
Right.
You just become, and then if you let it slip, you have to focus on using that other hand.
And that might have been.
Go ahead.
You take a look at Beatles tribute bands. The Paul in those bands, most of them have to teach themselves how to play left-handed, and it takes a couple of years to master that.
Yeah,
a great tribute band called the Fab Four. And the guy, he looks like Paul from a distance. He sings like him. He's got all of Paul's moves down. And when I watched the whole show, I saw how his posture and the behavior changed, and how he actually started playing his bass differently. And this is just a a guy playing Paul in a tribute band. But he did such a great job. You really kind of see those little things that he doesn't do anymore.
Have you ever?
Yeah, there's a lot of Paul ways that are they're gone from his lives. One of the things that I've noticed is he does not sing when he's singing a Paul song, an early Beatles song. He doesn't keep it the way it was written. If you were the one that wrote it and it's your song, you would continue it in the same manner. At least that would be my impression of what you would do. He changes the key. He changes the mix where you hold things. I don't know how to explain it without sharing like a comparison video of Paul and Billy type thing. But the speeds are different. The key is different.
I see, because like there are several of these videos. I've seen a couple of comparison videos.
I've been doing my own, trying to do them like side by side and recording, and you can hear the difference in the tone. People say that how do you get somebody to come in and replace them that sounds like them? Well, Ann just gave a perfect example. The tribute bands out there, not just for the Beatles, but for many other groups, do a marvelous job of imitating the person that they're supposed to be doing. And now this became a life role. It's not even just an imitation. It's now your life.
Yeah. You see, it's perfectly possible. Yeah, it's absolutely perfectly possible to do that. But people who know, like you say, people who know him well, who knew him personally or keen on the band, you'll spot these. You can't fool these people.
They're all under non-disclosures.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these open secrets, I think. It seems to be so many people know about it now that, I mean...
well, it wasn't even just the Beatles that left clues in their albums post 67-1 in their individuals or as the Beatles, but other groups that were friends with them have left clues when they're talking about different songs.
All right. Who, for example?
Now, yeah, I can't go off the top of my head and say who it was or whatever it was, but
Denny Lane.
Huh?
Denny Lane.
Denny Lane. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what did is it he or she?
It was a guitar player for the Wings.
Oh, Wings. Of course, they know all about it, didn't they? I mean, yeah. And what did he say?
Marianne, do you remember what he said?
Well, I've heard an accounting that was heard firsthand from Denny about how he had to get Paul out of jail in Japan because it was a fingerprint mismatch. That's when he was arrested in Japan for the marijuana that he smuggled in 8 pounds of marijuana in his suitcase. Japan wasn't keen on him being there to begin with from previous, I guess, tours with him there. But when his fingerprints didn't match, that was a big issue. He was in jail there 9 days. And from what I understand, he had to call Denny to call British intelligence to get him out of jail.
Of course, that would, if Paul was arrested and then Billy comes on, of course the fingerprints,
don't matter.
Give the name, but the fingerprints will be different. That's absolutely that's as convicting as hell.
It is. Because they were fingerprint, he had Paul was fingerprinted in Hamburg in Germany back in, was it 62, Ann, or 60? 61, somewhere in there. So
it was suspected of arson.
that was our interesting little story there with the stove. But yeah, there was shenanigans. Let's put it that way. There were shenanigans there, but it was innocent young kid fun. They were only 18 at the time, so
yeah. I mean, these things happen, don't they? But there must be I bet there are still case officers monitoring. Like you have this guy Cigar Man. You talk about this guy Cigar Man. There are probably real life case officers still monitoring the situation because they can't let it come out. I mean, it will come out eventually, but they're still desperate. Certainly while Billy's alive. I mean, I think things might change when Billy dies.
I think that's when the truth is going to come out. I think that's when it's going to be the safest for the truth to come out. But it's important just to, keep researching and, keep disclosing what we know and can get out there to the public for them to discern for themselves. And we hope The Shadow of the Baseman helps people along to understand how this could happen and how it happened. And we wrote the book so that you could easily discern the fictional parts from the factual parts. Because everybody knows, John did not marry a lady named Connie. So
Didn't have future girls.
really obvious.
I can see you've altered some. You have altered some of the reality. It's almost like a parallel universe. For example, in the 60s, of course, we had the Queen, but of course, you have it as the King. It's His Majesty, whereas, of course, in reality, it would be Her Majesty. And
Well, there was different things like that we were just changing up because you need to change it up, and it's obvious changing. Same thing with EMI and MEI. MEI had a separate little meaning for me, so it gives me a chuckle. But we also looked at it as the aspects of you have to have that mix.
Yeah, of course, it's like that's you have to have kind of, yeah. It's it does have a slight surreal feel to it, it really does. Those things are obvious, and people have to know that they have to use discernment when they're reading the book. Yeah, but I do think this really could like wake a few people up. This book really, I think, will. It's not just about the facts, like, of course, the other books that are written, like Nick Collison's book and things like that. They have the facts, they have the evidence, but a story is actually a very, very good way of not just listing the evidence, it's just by communicating information. So I do think if someone reads this, they'll think, "Blimey, could this be true?" And they'll probably move on to some of the other information. Yeah, they probably will. So I think it serves a purpose in that way. It really, really does. It does serve a purpose. So yeah, well done for this book. And you're going to write another. You're writing. What's your next? Are you collaborating still, the two of you? Or? Oh yeah, we'll be collaborating for a while. Oh, good.
Yeah. The next book we hope to have out this summer, and that's going to disclose all the truth in the book. Also, Shadow of the Baseman, we have some hidden symbolism in there. So we're going to disclose what all that means, too.
Oh, right. I was looking, because I remember you telling me that. I couldn't spot it, I must admit. But,
we didn't know while we were writing it either, amazingly enough. It was after we were doing editing, or even just after just looking through and saying, "Did you realize we did this?"
Well, there's some bits. I mean, I'm not sure whether they're mistakes or whether they're part of the clues. I was trying to work it out, but I don't. I'm curious. I'll find out. I'll tell you what. I'll find out when I read the next book.
Okay.
But I'm quite curious to find out what they are. I thought, oh, is that a spelling mistake, or is that? What's that mean? Things like that.
Yeah, there's hidden symbolism in there, and we did not realize it till we were doing the editing that there was symbolism that we embedded in there. And I'm just finishing up the chapters to get all the symbolism out of there. And didn't really, when I was looking at it, I didn't know what it all meant until I got to chapter 19. And then I realized, oh, this is what we're talking about now.
So it was it was subconscious. You just put it in there subconsciously.
Subconsciously,
totally. We just wrote. It just flowed. It came to us on a flaming pie. That's how we looked at it. It was like, download.
Well, the best way to write is to do it let your subconscious go free. I mean, some authors, I know they plan everything out. We were talking earlier on, some authors plan everything out before they start the draft. But I like to let my subconscious go free, and you end up channeling your muse, and sometimes some remarkable things can come out just by setting your imagination free to explore randomly, and amazing things can come out of that. But no, that's really amazing. So basically, well, I think the world is changing rapidly, and I've got a strong feeling that there's going to be some major revelations and actions in the world generally, not to do with Paul necessarily, but the world at large, the political world, I think is in upheaval at the moment. And probably by the summer, we could be looking at a very, very different kind of environment. And hopefully it'll be one where people are ready for new information, they're ready for a new spin on things, and they'll realise that they've been fed a lie about so many things for so long. Paul, being dead, lots of other things as well. Yeah, hopefully
Lots.
they'll be
Sadly.
ready. It'll be a nice hot iron for you to strike. I mean, fingers crossed, Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that book will be ready, and then we did leave in this book, The Shadow of a Bass Man, we put in a chapter at the end, which will be the sequel novel to this book, which then will be the third.
All right.
Release.
So it's going to be a trilogy.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
So
Everything has to go in threes, right?
Yeah, and I mean, my own little contribution will be in one of them, I think. Is it going to be the next one or the one after?
the next
The
one.
next one. Oh, brilliant. That's
True.
great.
Yeah.
Everybody, Ben's writing the forward, so there you go.
Oh, fantastic.
Little
Thank
clue
you.
on that.
I'm honoured. I'm absolutely honoured. So if people want to get hold of this, do you have a website that you can go and get hold of the book and learn more about you two ladies?
We're on Facebook. We have an authors page on Facebook called The Shadow of the Bass Man. And we're there, and you can buy our book on Amazon under Shadow of the Bass Man.
Yeah.
So far. And you
And
can
it's
also
So it's UK. I mean, we've seen sales already. UK, France, Australia. I'm trying to think if there was a couple other Spain, a couple other countries in there. So you can. I guess everybody has Amazon different. When we do ours here in the States, it's just the Amazon.com. So.
Okay. Well, if
no
listeners
market.
want to find out more, if you go to the show notes, ladies and gents, you'll find a link to the author's page on there and a link to the books page on Amazon, so you can purchase a copy of Shadow of the Bass Man. I very much recommend it if you like the subjects that I talk about on this show, whatever they are. I think this will appeal to you because it's not just about Paul; it's about so much more. It really, really is. So, well, congratulations to Marianne and Anne for this really, really good, this really, really great book. So well done. And I do hope you'll come back on the HPANWO show and talk more.
Absolutely. Anytime, Ben.
Brilliant. Right, well, thank you very much. I hope you have a nice day and hope to see you sometime after the lockdown.
That'd be great.
Thank you,
Been
Ben.
wanting to do that.
Oh, great. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
My name's Nick Hayes from Quest for the Invisibles, and I listen to HPANWO Radio.
And those were the fascinating authors Anne Walsh and Mary Ann Howard. And like I said, there are details in the show notes of how to get hold of the book. Please do check it out. And remember that Anne and Mary Ann have other titles that they are currently working on. And you will hear all about it on this show. I'm sure Anne and Mary Ann will be back. And indeed, I'm actually contributing to one of them. So you'll hear more about that closer to the time when it appears. But thank you very much to Anne and Mary Ann for being on the show. And Mary Ann is still in the chat box if you want to speak to her. It's really been good of her to contribute live